The first time I ever visited a prison, I was actually taking a vacation in England. And my hosts were this couple. They were in their 80s. And the lady had done prison ministry for decades, and she'd done it all across Europe. I want to say the first prison she ever went to was in Poland. But anyway, she and her husband took me one night to a Christmas party at a prison about an hour from Bath where they lived. And it's not the kind of thing you would find in most, tour guides of England. But I remember just having a great time meeting the residents there and the people who were involved in prison ministry. The local Methodist pastor gave the sermon, and we had mince pies and tea. And then this very old woman drove us home in the middle of the night and kept making wrong turns and nearly killed us on the back highways of England. But the fact that I went to this prison still stands out in my mind from that trip.
Well, I'm glad that you survived the drive.
Me too.
Well, my experience is not really of visiting prison as we're thinking about this episode today, but of voter registration. One year, I had a table set up at a local farmer's market, and a person had come to the table and explained that they could not vote because they had been in prison. And I asked if they had served their time and they were not on probation, and they said that all the time had been completed. So I shared with them that they were eligible to vote. And when this person filled out their voter registration and handed it to me, it was just, the look on their face was just, they were just so ecstatic. They were so grateful to be able to have this opportunity, that relief that just washed over them. It was a wonderful thing to be able to participate with that person in their voter registration.
Wow. That would be. Not long after you and I started meeting at that Mexican restaurant several years ago, I think I shared with you that I was involved for about 5 years with Kairos, which is a Christian ministry for people in prison. And I'm still a volunteer advocate with Prison Fellowship. So this is a topic that I've grown to care a lot about: incarceration and reentry.
Well, tonight we have two terrific guests joining us at the table.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Jerry Blassingame is the founder and CEO of Soteria Community Development Corporation. Jerry received a 20-year prison sentence in 1995 and only served 3.5 years after being paroled in 1999. In 2018, Jerry published his first book, Reclaimed, a memoir that details his story from tragedy to triumph. So Jerry, welcome to the Afterword table. We're so glad that you're here. Tell us what you're up to right now.
So it's good to be here, and thank you all for inviting me. So I'm 21 years into founding my nonprofit, and we have I have 10 staff members right now. We have a 16-bed transitional house up in Travelers Rest where men get directly out of prison, and we transition them to a job, a house, just education, and they can stay up to 1 year. We also own and operate 14 low-income rentals. And we have a social enterprise called Soteria at Work, where we teach men how to tear down old houses and barns, and we use the reclaimed wood to build furniture. So it's a job training program. And so I'm managing all of that, plus my virtual speaking engagements these days. So it's still busy for me, but I enjoy the work that I do with reentry and community development. So I'm still busy during the pandemic.
Wow, you sure are. And I would imagine between the transition and the work training facility that you are very, very busy.
Yes.
Wow.
And since I recently bought a table from Soteria, I can attest to the fact that the quality is extraordinary. In fact, I know you guys asked me to send a picture of the table in my kitchen. The reason that I haven't sent it is because I think the table actually sort of makes my kitchen look a little shabby. So until I can get some new blinds to set it off, I'm not sure that I want to take a picture of it and have it going around like that. But
oh, that's great, Holland.
Our other guest, Kate Weaver Patterson, leads the South Carolina Second Chance Justice Collaborative. She attended Duke University for her undergraduate and law degrees. Kate also holds a master's degree in international affairs from the University of Hong Kong. So, Kate, tell us more about the Second Chance Justice Collaborative.
So the Second Chance Justice Collaborative is a partnership between National Reentry organization Root and Rebound and Soteria Community Development Corporation, led by the incredible Jerry Blassingame, who's joining us in this conversation today. And we exist to assist those who have been impacted by the criminal justice system, folks who have a criminal record. That is 1 in 3 Americans and over 1 million South Carolinians. Those folks often exist in a legal gray area where they have left the public defender's office or another defense attorney's office after the conviction or dismissal of their criminal case. And there are all of these legal barriers, or what we call collateral consequences, that come up as a result of their conviction. And oftentimes there isn't a legal services organization who can help assist with those specific issues. So we at the Second Chance Justice Collaborative are a statewide organization, the only organization in the state that is focused on reentry and criminal justice reform exclusively. And we provide direct services, policy advocacy, and education around the impact of mass incarceration and services for those who have been impacted.
That's a lot, Kate. I don't know where you have time to even breathe half of your day. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us. Well, we're really excited to have these guests at the table, and I got to see them at a League of Women Voters event where they were talking about some of these similar issues. But for our listeners and for our wonderful friends who join us every week at the table, they don't know you, Jerry and Kate. So let's start with you first, Jerry. What's your story? Why did you get into this incarceration and reentry work?
Yeah, well, my story actually starts as a traumatized kid. I witnessed my mother murdered when I was 5 years old. And I had 4 older siblings. My grandmother took us. We were living in West Greenville over on Woodside, and she took us and moved us across town and, just began to raise us. I was in the 1st grade. My mother had a twin who passed away 2 years before her. And the guy who killed my mother also shot my grandfather, and he died a year later. So our family suffered these tragedies within 3 or 4 years of each other. And my grandmother was a loving, kind, sweet lady, tried to do the best she could, but she drank every day. And now I understand why she drank, because of the trauma. And we didn't know. It was just a part of our life. But school was kind of the place that, I was escaping to every day. I managed to get through school and, middle school, graduated high school, was the only one of my 4 other siblings that graduated high school and went to college. I went to college, I studied architectural engineering because of my high school vocational education teacher who taught me into going to college because he told me that I could be an engineer. So I got a 2-year scholarship to take architectural engineering. But my 2nd year in college, it was back in the 80s, and I started watching for some drug dealers on the corner selling drugs. And I got wrapped up in the drug dealing game very quick and went to prison the first time. I got probation. I spent 4 months in prison. The second time, out 6 months when I got out, I got sentenced to 20 years. So it was a hard road, but I went in and I changed my life. Prison ministry really changed me. I heard Holland talking about Kairos and Prison Fellowship. Those 2 organizations were the foundation to my being a person of faith. And so for 3.5 years, I wrote down the vision. I prayed about what I was going to do. I knew that there were young men like me who were in prison who did not have a place to live when they got out. So I wrote down a vision to start a nonprofit while I was in prison. And I worked 3.5 years every day until I was paroled in 1999. And in March of 1999, I was released. And in June of 1999, we had our nonprofit started. So we were working and, 21 years later, we have created a great organization that has helped over 5,000 men and women in the last 20 years to transition successfully from incarceration. Our recidivism rate is only 4%. We have a 96% success rate.
Oh my goodness, Jerry, I'm just like, you're hitting all the bells and whistles for me in education and vocational training. And that's just amazing. Real quick though, because again, this is the podcast on the future of words. For some of our listeners, you said a word that might not be real clear to people, and maybe you can help with a definition. Recidivism. What would you say would be a good definition for that? It's the rate that people return back to prison. And that's what, we call the recidivism rate. Nationally is about 69 to 70%. I think in South Carolina, we're about 34%. So we're doing a little better than national. But anybody who returns back is not good at all, But we're doing much better than our prison system. Only 4% of people who graduate our program or go through it only return back. So nationally, South Carolina, 34%, nationally 69%, but in your program, only 4%. Wow.
What do you attribute that to?
Faith. We make sure, guys do, we are a faith-based program, but we do the practical things. They have to work. They have to understand budgeting. We work on getting their credit score up so that when they leave our program, they can rent a house or buy a house or an apartment or something. We have to create equity for ourselves in the community, especially Black and brown people. We're so far behind the rest of Americans. And so one way that we found out that if we create equity and help people to create an asset. So most people will leave our program with an automobile and money in the bank. And so some of them have never saved before. They've never had a credit card before. They've never had a checking account. And so we're creating new inroads. It's upward economic mobility.
We could go on about that for quite some time, right?
Absolutely. I mean, just the idea of creating equity in our community. And as you were talking about that, we've had episodes in the past where we have talked about some of the disparity and the difficulties, and to create that equity in our community, I think is phenomenal. I really appreciate that.
Yes, most definitely.
Okay, so Kate, we get a little personal here. What's your story, and why did you get into this reentry and incarceration work?
So first, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here, and I always welcome any sort of opportunity to talk about this work because there are days where it feels hard to breathe. But Jerry and I are so passionate about the work that we do, and really fortunate to be able to do it. So my story is that I grew up in Greenville, the daughter of two Presbyterian ministers, and when I left at 18, swore that I would never come back. One should never say never when you're 18, or really even later. I swore I'd never drive a minivan, and I haven't been able to keep that promise either. But I left Greenville and I went to undergrad and law school and spent some time abroad. But I had interned at the Greenville County Public Defender's Office in college, which was really the reason that I decided to go to law school, and worked with some incredible attorneys there, John Malden and Frank Epps. Had the fortune and misfortune of working on a death penalty case where our client was sentenced to death. And that was hugely impactful on me and made me want to go to law school and do that type of work. But life being what it is, I came out. Law school is not cheap. So came out with some debt, really wanted at the age of 25 to live in New York City. So I went to a big corporate law firm on Wall Street and did that work for 2 years. Met amazing people and did amazing things, and very quickly realized that my heart was in the public defender world, was in public interest, and that I needed to do something different. And so after working with a couple of judges and really having the opportunity to see the system from that side, I moved back to Greenville to be closer to my family. And I applied for a job at the public defender's office, and we were just coming out of the recession and they didn't have anything available. And so I ended up at the solicitor's office, which, if anyone is listening, not from South Carolina or unfamiliar with South Carolina, that's what we call our DAs, our district attorneys, our prosecutors in South Carolina. And I ended up there for 5 years doing domestic violence and child abuse prosecution. And I'm so grateful for that experience, because I think it's really important for those of us working within the system, outside the system, to change the system, to really be able to understand the inner workings of the system and understand the complexities of people's lives on both victims' side and those who have been arrested, for purposes of really thinking through how we can best get people out of the system. And so I spent 5 years doing that, but I will admit that my heart was always more on the side of those who were being impacted. And one of the things that we do in the solicitor's office, and they do this in solicitor's offices throughout the country, people are coming in and they are trying to help mitigate in some way a really terrible situation. And the options that are available to our prosecutors and our defense attorneys are ill-equipped to deal with those complex situations. When I'm a prosecutor and my only options are to dismiss a case or to put someone on probation or send them to prison, I didn't feel like I was really able to help anyone who was involved. So when the opportunity came to come in with Root and Rebound and Soteria and launch the Second Chance Justice Collaborative, it felt like what my career had been building toward. And it felt like, and I hope is and will be, an opportunity to really think critically about the system and the ways that we can change it to make safer communities, stronger families, and more equitable situations for everyone involved.
That's amazing. And again, can see now, hindsight, how your training has led you to this point. But sometimes when we're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel real great.
It seems a little all over the place, but it really worked out beautifully. And,
wow.
And I'm really fortunate to do what I do. That's wonderful.
Jerry, this is a hard question to ask, but I think it's a question I'm sometimes asked, and I know a lot of the older men that have been in Kairos for several years say they get this question from friends. Why do you care about people in prison? If you want to spend public dollars, if you want to spend nonprofit money, put it into children in school, put it into arts programs, put it into housing, put it into something. Why prison?
Well, we spend too much money incarcerating people. I'm not an abolitionist. I believe that if somebody commit a crime, they need to pay. But I don't think we need to put people away for that amount of time. People spend too much time in prison. So I'm not one to put money in prison. We spend almost $20,000 per person, Holland, and the average stay is about 4 years. We're spending over $100,000. We had about, 19,000 people. So last year we're spending over $500 million in our state prisons. And, I don't want to put money. I want to put money in education, so the money that we're spending to house people, we need to be educating folk. And so our legislators need to understand that. Our law needs to understand it. But the problem is, we have old laws on the book that need to be changed, mandatory minimums. People are still getting 20 and 30 years for a first offense charge. And I think that's the biggest problem. So I don't understand why they don't see it. It's our tax dollars. We see what's going on. And the thing about it is that when people get out of prison, they're not changed. That is what breaks my heart. They're not changed. I would rather sentence somebody to college than sentence them to prison. So at least they have some education, and they can start a living. When men and women get out of prison, they don't have anything. That they're worse than before they went. So we have a serious problem.
What would you say specifically to people of faith about why care about people in prison?
Well, we care about people because, the Bible talks about it. Jesus told us to go visit those who are in prison. That's what we are called to do. We're called for the least of these. And, the average citizen, should understand that too, and want to be obedient to what the scriptures say. That's one of the things, that I read early on in my Christianity when I was in prison. And I had no idea, because I wasn't raised up a Christian. I had no idea that, the Bible talked about taking care of those who were in prison. And when I saw that, I was amazed, and, and I was thankful for some of the ministries that came in and who were looking, to do exactly what the scriptures commanded them to do.
Wow. I really appreciate that answer. And again, singing the song about prevention versus reaction and what we can do on the preventive end through education. I really appreciate that, Jerry.
So, Kate, what about you? What do you say to people who respond with, why care about people in prison?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is so important in the work that we do, we call it our Changing Hearts and Minds campaign, because so often in our culture and our society, people who are in prison or even in jail, and for folks listening, if they don't understand the difference, people are in jail typically when they are being held before they have been convicted. So they have been charged with a crime, but they have not yet been convicted of that crime. And people are in prison as punishment for a conviction. And so often, people in either one of those types of institutions are considered to be throwaways. We've seen that really unfold in terrible ways with the COVID pandemic and the incredible danger to folks in carceral settings because of the overcrowding, because of the often unsanitary conditions. And we've seen a real reticence in certain areas to put in place fairly simple measures to protect people. And quite frankly, I think that's because Holland, like you said, a lot of people think, why should I care about people who are in jail or in prison? There are so many reasons, but let's start first with the fact that they are human beings. And they are human beings who deserve grace. They are human beings who often have made terrible decisions or terrible mistakes, but are not and should not be solely defined by those mistakes. They are human beings who are often subject to inhumane conditions that cause stress and trauma to them that will have really negative impacts on all of us when they get out. And even if I can't convince someone of the humanity of those in prison, which would be really unfortunate and I think completely contradictory to who we are and want to be as Americans in a civilized society, who we want to be. If you're a religious person, there's a lot about people in prison in the Bible and how they should be treated. But even if I can't convince somebody of that, the economics of keeping folks incarcerated, it costs us about $60 a day to incarcerate someone at a county jail or in state prison. We spent $632 million last year in South Carolina on corrections. So if you don't care about the humanity of people who, by the way, are going to get out for the vast majority of them and return to your communities. And so we need to really be thinking about how we're treating people inside so that we can be sure that they can safely reenter when they come out. Even if none of that is a concern to you, the humanity, the public safety, the economics alone make it such that people need to care and really need to be thinking about why have we had a 500% increase in incarceration in this country over the last 40 years?
Well, there are so many different arguments to be made, from just pure humanitarian interest to self-interest to the general benefit of the community. It's not the way we often think about criminal justice reform, I think, but it's such a complex and complete way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Holland. What are some misconceptions that people have about crime, punishment, and reentry? And how would you like to correct those with truth? And Jerry, in your earlier answer, you did mention something about an abolitionist. And I think, again, we might need to clarify, because I don't think you're meaning that type of abolitionist that we would think of in getting rid of slavery, which obviously grateful for that as well. But I think you're speaking about a different term. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, there are some people, some activists who take the stance of abolishing the prison system, not having prisons at all. No one goes to prison, in which I don't like prisons. Prisons are not a good place, but I punish my kids. If somebody does something wrong, they need to be punished, because I went to prison and I was punished, and I corrected my life, because of that punishment. So some misconceptions about punishment is that, I say this all the time: when you punish someone without a relationship, you create rebellion. And so punishment does not change people. Just by somebody going to prison, that does not punish people. And so most people won't, we have lock them up and throw away the key. That's the mentality that most people have. If you do a crime, you go do the time. But I've been in prison, and most of the people in there are not changing because they're sitting in a cell. We need to look at, crime and, the proportion of punishment for the crime that's committed. I think we're way off on that. We're spending too much money for petty crimes that people are committing, and we're just investing millions of dollars in our prison system, when billions now, that we should not, be doing. So, those are just a couple of the things, and then on the reentry side, a lot of people don't understand what prison reentry is. They think when you get out, that's reentry. I believe that reentry starts the day that a person gets sentenced, or the day they go to county jail, because what happens is there's a whole continuum when it comes to reentry. Not just the person that's been incarcerated, but they may have children, they may have a wife, they may have people or elderly people that they're taking care of. So now you've taken this, and most of the time it's the breadwinner out of the family. Now you got these other dependents who are dependent on something or someone to live. And so now reentry involves the whole family. So what we do is, with our rental housing, once we get a guy out and we try to find him a permanent house, most of the time he has a family member that he's been taking care of, or somebody that he loves and want to take care of. So we have a family integration part too, where we try to get the whole family. And sometimes with women, their children have been taken away by the DSS system, social services. So we try to get attorneys to help, get a case and get these children back with these mothers, because these mothers really love their children.
Jerry, I appreciate that so much. I was just actually on the phone with a mom yesterday, and she was so upset because, now we've got school situations that are coming down the pike, and truancy issues and all this kind of stuff. And there's so much fear about what will happen if I'm put in jail. And you're right. I mean, oftentimes it is that main breadwinner or the caretakers that we have to consider about family reentry.
Exactly.
So I think that one of the most important misconceptions for us to grapple with as a society is the racial disparity within the system and why that is. So we will incarcerate 1 in 3 Black men during their lifetime. We will incarcerate 1 in 16 white men, and I believe it's 1 in 9 Latino men. So people of color are far more likely to be incarcerated. Black women, actually, that 1 in 18 Black women will be incarcerated during their lifetime. That is one of the fastest growing demographics that we're seeing within our prison system. And oftentimes, folks will assume that that is because of differing crime rates amongst different races of people. And so one of the things that I think is so essential to dispel is that that is just not true. When we talk about racial disparities within the system, it is, which, by the way, in South Carolina, 60% of our prison population is Black, even though less than a third of our state population is Black. That is not because Black people are more likely to commit crimes. Actually, studies show that particularly with drugs, for instance, which is a large portion of our prison population, that it is actually white young people who are much more likely to be using and distributing drugs, but it is Black individuals who are much more likely to be arrested for using those drugs. The real correlation that we see in terms of crime rates is poverty. And once you account for the economic inequities that we see in our country between racial groups, the crime rates are basically the same. We are incarcerating and arresting poor people. And because we incarcerate and arrest poor people, they often remain poor because they remain stuck in a cycle of collateral consequences, of fines and fees that come up from the criminal justice system, of lack of access to economic opportunity. Those poor people are often stuck in the carceral system. And so we really need to be thinking about the social fabric and the rips in our social fabric that give rise to this level of incarceration and crime rates. Our crime rates are also lower now than they have been for a long time. But there is no correlation, and maybe this is the second, racial disparities in incarceration do not have to do with whether people of different races are more likely to commit crimes. And that is simply not true. And the second thing is that studies show that incarceration, and particularly long terms of incarceration, do very, very little to actually prevent crime. So we are going about our criminal justice system in what is very clearly a racially discriminatory way, and in a way that isn't working. And that, I think, should make folks really say, why are we spending billions of dollars a year on a system that we know isn't working, and what can we do to make it work?
Those are some very clear misconceptions that I think we would want to have corrected. Thank you for sharing that.
Jerry, if you had 100% control over the U.S. criminal justice system, you didn't have to answer to the state legislatures or the federal government. It was just Jerry Blassingame could do whatever he wanted with the U.S. criminal justice system. How would you prevent crime, punish criminals, rehabilitate offenders, serve their families, seek justice for victims, and keep society safe all at the same time? Because that seems like a tall order.
It is a very tall order, but one thing I'll say, because this is something that I've been pushing for a while, and I'm not sure if our audience know this, have ever heard this term before, but restorative justice. And restorative justice is working in some states and some cities, but I believe that restorative justice would be a good measure that we could use nationwide to help heal. And most of the time it's with violent crimes and violent offenders. But when you get the person who committed a crime with their victim and sit them down and let them begin to have a dialogue, and there's forgiveness, we can heal. We're not putting people in prison. We don't have to spend all this time with lawyers and court cases. Even as a Christian, I believe in forgiveness. People always ask me, I've been married for 22 years, and people always ask me, how you stay married so long? Well, marriage is full of forgiveness. You have to have communication and full of forgiveness. So I think one of the things is that, if we could start a restorative justice process where the person who committed the crime could sit down with their victim, have a conversation, find out why, most of the time people who committed a crime, especially if it's a violent crime, is traumatized a victim. Even those people who sell drugs or use drugs or, been in some type of drug activity, it's because of trauma. I believe that we need to look at mental health more. We're punishing mental illness and we're punishing poverty. Going back to my soapbox of financial literacy, teaching people how to manage their money. If we teach people how to manage money in elementary schools and middle schools, I think we'll have less crime. We need to put all of our extra money there. I would close down maybe 2/3 of the prisons we have and put all that money into education. And I guarantee you we would not have to build all the prisons that we're building, because if people are making money, they're making an honest living, they're working every day, or they got their own business, there's no need for crime. There's no need for selling drugs and breaking in and stealing. And I don't think people would be as angry and have these crimes of passion either. So, Jerry Blassingame for president. Let's do it.
You'd have my vote at this point for sure.
Absolutely. Oh, wow. Absolutely. And it is interesting when you mentioned that word trauma, Jerry, because I do think we are starting to see an uptick in some of these crimes and things in our communities because of COVID right now. There's a lot of trauma going on right now.
Yeah.
I see this with my parents as an educator. I see this with family because there's no real good solution right now. And so there's a lot of trauma. I really appreciate you bringing that to the forefront.
Yeah, I think probably there may be upwards of 60 to probably, it's about 65 to 70% of people who are in prison probably got some diagnosed or undiagnosed mental illness, all trauma related. And we need to deal with that. We need to dig into that issue and help our citizens.
Can I just ask this too? I understand the security that comes from putting a violent offender into a maximum security facility, right? I mean, people feel safer knowing that someone who's willing to commit a violent crime is off the street. For medium and security prisons, for minimum security prisons and camps, what's the point? I mean, are they effective? Why wouldn't we do something else? Like, I don't know, I'm curious what the point is for those things. Are they considered to be more effective? Are they less effective, or what? I don't get how we're keeping people safe with minimum and mid-level security.
My take is what I think they started doing was when a person would leave a maximum security prison, it would be a step down, kind of like a next step before they get out. I think that's what it needs to be for. But when you get somebody who maybe, stole a bicycle and you give them 5 years in a minimum security prison, that's stupid. It doesn't make any sense to me. And so I think they're using them for the wrong reason. And I might be wrong saying the step down, but it seems like that may have been what they were doing. But, when somebody has to go do a year in prison and you're taking them from a job, it just doesn't make any sense to me, Holland, either. I just don't understand that. We need our legislators to understand, and we need to make our community feel safe about people, because when somebody go to prison, most people just, paint them with a broad brush. They think everybody's violent. Sometimes we don't separate violent and nonviolent. They say, oh, they're in prison, they're bad people. So I don't agree with the camps in the minimum security prison stuff either, because it's just a waste of money to me. So,
thanks for that. Kate, if you had 100% control over the U.S. criminal justice system, you did not have to answer to a state legislator or a governor or the House of Representatives at the national level. It was just Kate Weaver Patterson, and her ideas could be implemented across the United States. What would criminal justice look like?
I tell my husband all the time that if I ran the world, things would be much improved. Listen, the criminal justice system is a massive and complex and complicated system that is underpinned by people both on the government side and on the directly impacted side, who have such a mix of circumstances that they are bringing into this. I think initially we need to acknowledge that every system and every civilization up to this point has had some form of justice system and some mechanism by which when a person is wronged, there is a way to right that. And as a former prosecutor, I have real appreciation, having spent a lot of time with victims, particularly of sexual offenses, for the feelings of the need for justice and sometimes, frankly, retribution that can come into that. However, we are currently operating in a system that is broken, and it is an example of systemic racism. So if I were 100% in charge, I would first require from clerks to judges to police officers on the street to prosecutors intense bias training around who we are arresting and why. I would make massive overhauls to our penal and prison system, because the way that we focus on punishment and not rehabilitation is detrimental to everyone involved. And I would take us to a system that is much more in line with a place like Germany or Sweden, where their crime rates are not higher, but they treat people like human beings. And so often inside our jails and prisons, we are not treating human beings like human beings. And we are not acknowledging within the system that these people are humans. Oftentimes humans who have made terrible, terrible decisions and done enormous harm, but who are still human. And that there are ways to separate folks from society for public safety, but also really help them in a journey so that when they get out, which are who are the people who Jerry and I see so often, they are not caught in an almost impossible cycle of being unable to get a job, unable to get employment, unable to rebuild their lives. They're not properly trained. They don't necessarily have job skills that have been provided to them inside. They've been living in an environment often of violence that causes incredible stress and trauma that they bring outside. And they face these collateral consequences or perpetual punishment that really stop them from being able to move forward and often end up in them being reincarcerated. So I would require bias training. I would completely change the way we quote unquote punish and rehabilitate based on some other countries' models. And I would do away with almost all of the collateral consequences that we see, what we call perpetual punishment. They are legal barriers that are put in place that means that folks' criminal records follow them around for the rest of their lives. And so we have got to come up with a better way such that someone's mistake at 17 is not impacting their life in a way that they can't survive at 55. And so those would be the top three things that I would do.
Wow, Kate, thank you so much. That is a rich dialogue right there with so many things that you've included. So we're going to try to succinctly summarize some of that. And Kate, I'll start with you first. What is an essential element we need to know to understand incarceration and reentry?
You need to understand that 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record. So when you think that this doesn't impact you or someone you know, you are wrong. We need to understand that we are incarcerating 1 in 3 Black men in this country. That is simply unacceptable when we understand what incarceration and the difficulties of reentry do to the fabric of a community. And particularly right now, as we have experienced in 2020, a national awakening, but I'm not sure yet a national reckoning with the systemic racism that we see within the system. We need to understand what these collateral consequences do to folks and how they continue to impact their life. I will say, as a prosecutor, that's the one thing that I wish I had had a better understanding of. And I think we need to do a better job in educating our folks in the system, most of whom are there to do great work and do the right thing. But we don't have an understanding, even within the system, of the difficulties that people face when they get out of the system, even for something simple. We just had a woman not long ago at the Justice Collaborative who had a 20-year-old drug felony that was still keeping her out of housing. It's a nonviolent offense. And Holland, to go back to your earlier question, that's another thing I would get rid of, is we would treat nonviolent drug offenses very differently. But it's a nonviolent drug offense that has continued to follow folks around and make it such that it's really difficult for them and their families to thrive.
Thank you so much. How about you, Jerry? What's an essential element we need to understand?
It costs us more to incarcerate people than to educate them. And reentry is essential once somebody released from prison. You can't lock somebody up for 5 or 10 years and say, go do better, with no training and no resources. And, most Americans probably think that, but no, we have to make sure that, if a person go to prison 5 years, their health has declined. They don't wear the same size clothes. We see that a lot. We have to buy underwear and socks and shirts for all the guys that come to our program because they've been locked up for 5 years or 10 years. And so, it's like bringing a baby into your home, literally. They don't have IDs, no birth certificate, no social security card, and you can't get a social security card without a birth certificate. You can't get a birth certificate without a social security card. And so you got people like us, we're on the ground every day and we're professionals and we know how to do this. The average Joe don't know what to do when someone get out of prison, So reentry is an essential part of it, and we need more. We need to put more money in reentry services. And we don't have a lot of money on that side. We put more money into incarcerating people, but we put no money into rehabilitating people.
Wow. Thank you two so much. This was such an amazing conversation.
So thank you, Kate and Jerry, for being part of this important conversation. And while you wait for part 2, please go to theafterwordpodcast.com and become a subscriber. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. And as always, you are welcome at our table.